Do you know the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion? According to Dennis Healy, the difference between those two is the thickness of a prison wall. Avoidance is perfectly legal. Evasion, however, is not, and that, at worst case scenario, will give you time spent at Her Majesty's pleasure, eating perhaps not the best cuisine in the world. Being confined in a box is probably not the best look in life to have. In this week's video, I'm going to go through the distinction between tax avoidance, which is perfectly fine, perfectly acceptable. Morally speaking, you might have your thoughts on that one, and also tax evasion, which is a definite no-no, explaining what those differences are, sharing some tips with you if you find that you've got yourself caught in the evasion net and you want to get yourself out of that net. Let's crack on with the video. Now, tax avoidance at its core is the ability and the legal right to manage your affairs such that you minimize your tax liability. When we hear about tax avoidance, we can sometimes let our minds wander and we're thinking big corporate bodies. However, if you're somebody who's investing in tax-efficient products like ISAs or pensions, if you're somebody who's claiming the maximum allowances they're entitled to in an individual capacity, claiming married couples allowance if your spouse has not claimed their full allowance, if you're somebody who's claiming capital allowances in their businesses, well, folks, that is tax avoidance. And again, that is perfectly legitimate. If you're thinking of legitimate ways to pay yourself, remunerate yourself, a dividend, a salary and a benefit structure, again, that is perfectly legal and that's tax avoidance. At the other extreme of tax avoidance, we may see some what I call aggressive and assertive tax planning approaches. We can talk about the idea of offshoring. We can talk about companies, big global multinational companies that may be located in terms of their head office in low tax territories, supplying goods and services, no mention of any particular coffee shops here, providing services to those destinations around the world, which might be located in high tax territories and effectively shifting profits around the world. That, by the way, folks, if you want to do some bedtime reading, is known as transfer pricing. Again, transfer pricing, offshoring, having companies based in low tax territories is perfectly legitimate. It may raise some eyebrows. It may be morally questionable. It's not for me to say what those morals should be. Everybody has their own perspective and their own yardstick. So moral judgments and tax policy don't always go hand in hand, but morally questionable, but legally perfectly fine. Now let's explore tax evasion. Tax evasion is where you understate your income or hide it. You overstate and claim for expenses that never happened. You're claiming for items that you know weren't legitimate. So, for example, claiming for a holiday when that's in reality what actually is a holiday where you're going to relax. Claiming as a business expense would be an example of tax evasion. You're deliberately overstating your income and expenses with a view of minimizing your profitability and minimizing your tax exposure. Now, culpability, if you do it in terms of innocently, may be a different dynamic here. Those traders who might do jobs for cash so they don't have to charge VAT, well, that is tax evasion. Now, tax evasion is something we don't want to encourage, something that's not very good, not just from a moral point of view, but also from a consequences point of view. Those people who may have, for example, second homes, where they're not actually declaring that income on that second property, that is tax evasion. If you know that you should be declaring that income. Now, people who get themselves caught in arenas, in areas where income is not being declared fully, expenses are being overclaimed, may do that innocently because they don't have a full understanding on tax legislation and rules. Lots of DIY taxpayers I've met in my time will do this because they've been led to believe that is a perfectly acceptable way of doing things. But if you're in that net, then my advice is always to take the front foot. Make sure you've got somebody competent that you can approach and voluntarily declare the tax that should have been paid. If you are on the front foot and take charge of that situation, then you will mitigate any penalties and any consequential action. In over 28 years of being in business, being a tax planner, tax advisor, as well as a business coach here, I've helped lots of people here get out of very tricky situations, pay the taxes due, and avoid, very harsh penalties and consequential criminal prosecutions as well. So folks, let's just summarize where we are. Tax avoidance, perfectly fine, perfectly legal, and it's taking and planning your affairs such that you minimize your tax exposure. If you are a higher rate taxpayer, for example, if you've got income of a variety of sources and you want to reduce and mitigate your tax liability, then make sure you speak to your accountant. By all means, you can contact us as well, contact details provided in the show notes, but manage your affairs and mitigate that responsibility of paying tax. And that's perfectly fine and that's perfectly acceptable in my opinion. Tax evasion, though, is not. I would never condone that. And if you are declaring income incorrectly and you're deliberately suppressing that, just be aware HMRC have got much more by way of resources, much more interpretive ability to search the internet, to get information from a variety of sources at a local level, at bank level, from the online companies as well. So one has to be very careful to navigate that path, which could lend you into financial problems. So folks, I hope that's made some sense to you. If you've liked this video, then I'd love some feedback, some comments. What do you think? Do you think that line between avoidance and evasion is very blurred? If you found it useful, I'd love it if you could share it with folks who you feel will get some benefit from that. If you feel there are topics you'd like covered on a future I Hate Numbers video, then I'm always receptive to producing that content there. I always like to listen to my audience, and that's my intention. So until next week, folks, I'll see you on the other side.